Great, thank you. Right, welcome everybody to the next webinar in our little series. We've been very lucky to have some fantastic speakers, and we have another fantastic speaker today. I'd like to welcome Dr. Aled Singelton, who's from the University of Swansea. Aled is going to talk to us about psychogeography and the place narrative. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about this, so I'll leave all the detailed description to Aled. Before we start, there are a few housekeeping details I need to go through. If you could keep yourselves muted while we're on the call, that helps a lot, because background noise can interrupt the speakers quite more so than you might think. The odd boiling kettle can throw a real spanner in the works, so it's really helpful if you're muted. In line with that, because there are so many of us, it's really helpful if you have questions that you could submit them through the chat. If you look at the bottom of your screen somewhere, let's put a slide up here to illustrate what you're looking for. If you could put your questions into the chat facility, we will endeavour to get through them all during the question session. Don't feel you have to wait until the question session to ask. You can ask at any point that you remember, but we'll try and answer them all together. If there are any questions we can't answer today, we can get back to you by email with other answers after the event. After the event, we'll also send you a link to a recording of this webinar. We will send an anonymised chat transcript, so anybody's names and so on that appear in the chat, we'll take those out, but the content will remain. And we'll add any answers to questions that haven't been answered during this session as well. We will also share Aled's slides, if that's okay with you, Aled, if anybody is interested in following up things there. We'll start with Aled's presentation, and then we'll break for a little question session. And if we have time at the end, my colleague Viv, who is lurking here with her camera not working, is going to do a quick demonstration of Society Rome, just for those who are maybe not familiar with it yet. I should also mention our YouTube channel, which has lots and lots of videos on it, both of previous webinars here, but also various aspects of Digimap and how different parts of it work. So if anybody needs to catch up on how different aspects work, that's always a good place to start. I think then I shall stop talking and hand over to Aled for his presentation. Thanks very much, Aled.
Thank you. Is my screen showing now?
Just a second. Sometimes it takes a minute to kick in.
Wait a minute, here we go. I'm just going to do it.
There we go. Yes, I can see your slides now, Aled. Thanks.
Okay. I just need to actually start the slideshow. Hi, so my name is Aled Singelton, and I'm at the Centre for Innovative Ageing at Swansea University. And the talk today, there were basically 5 things I want to get across. It's some of the basic functions of Society Digimap, and I think Viv can probably show a bit at the end if we've got some time. And then I'm going to take you all through my case study, which is about aging populations and trying to understand why one given place has got an aging population. But the kind of like the core of it really is my approach, which is this idea of psychogeography, which I will give a bit more detail on as we go through. And then it's all about finding a line through a place, and I'll explain how I use that line to then connect to different data. And then at the end, we'll just look at a couple of potential applications and opportunities. So yeah, I'm an early career researcher. So I finished my PhD in December last year. But behind that, I've got 15 years experience of working on built environment projects and working with communities of place. And I've used GIS quite a lot in terms of things like SwiftMap, and I spent 10 years as a regeneration project manager. So I've got masses of experience of buildings and all of that type of thing, and that kind of drives my kind of thinking is how places evolve, looking at kind of the clues that we get from architecture and the layout of places. And I'm intrigued really by a sense of space, place, and culture. So what I'm just going to briefly introduce Society Digimap. For my PhD, I used Digimap a lot. I used it principally. I used the historic maps but then also use the Ordinance Survey maps. And there's so much stuff on there, which I'm sure you've all dipped into at different times. So I was particularly interested in understanding the kind of deeper qualities of a place, and not just as a block of statistics. And like I said, historic maps is really good, being able to kind of look at the evolution of a particular place. So there are two main functions in society. You've got the Society roam and the download. The roam is principally about just being able to look through a specific place, and I'll cover that in a bit of detail. And also we'll look at the download. So this is my case study. For my PhD, I wanted to explore emotional attachment to place and space, particularly trying to understand why certain places have got aging populations. So aging population essentially means that the median age just goes up. And here we've got a case study of a place called Caerleon in South Wales, in Newport. And these are some stats which introduce the place, and it shows you how the proportion of people 65 and above has gradually been going up. And I'm sure the latest census will bear that out as well. So you've generally got the number of people who are, young people has gone down quite a lot, but then also 16 to 64. And I really wanted to understand why it is that this place has got such, what this is actually, out of all the parts, the neighbourhoods of Newport, this is the one that's got the highest number of people who are 65 and above as a proportion. So one of the things that's interesting is this idea of the life course, and to split life down into being a child, young person, adult, and then through to older age. And there's actually no real way that we can sort of understand where people have lived throughout their lives. There's no administrative data that says person X has lived in this place. There is one thing called the Lothian birth cohort, which is data about people who come from the Lothian area around Edinburgh. But it's very rare that you get that kind of data, and it's an exception to the rule. So what I did for my work was to try to collect biographical data about why people had a connection to this given place. So through the project, I did approximately 20 interviews, and half of them were outdoor walking interviews, which is where the participant took me on the walk, and I'll show you that in a sec. And because I was principally looking at older people, there were some people in their 90s, for example, who couldn't easily actually leave the house. So we also did what's called a walk of the mind, which is where people showed me, well, they described their connection to certain places. And again, Digimap helped me there, because I was able to look back at the historic maps to sort of see what they were talking about, to put it into context. Because certainly people who are quite a few decades older than me, the things that they're talking about weren't necessarily on the ground in front of me. So the place itself has got a mixture of architecture. On the left, you've got a 1960s maisonette. A maisonette is a kind of a flat, one upstairs and one downstairs. But on the right hand side, there's a medieval street scene. This is a conservation area, and it's all built upon a Roman fortress. So a lot of the people who live in this place live in sort of 60s, 70s architecture, such as you see on the left, more so than the kind of historic centre of the place. So these are the kind of the starts, the clues to understand this place and what its narrative could be. This is just an example of a walking interview. Again, this is actually imported into Digimap, and the walk was traced as a GPX. So the walks last up to an hour, sometimes more, sometimes less. And it's always led by the person who I'm interviewing. And some really interesting themes come up from these interviews, like family life and shopping and all sorts of things. So from these different interviews, I was able to sort of understand a little bit more about how the place developed over time. And this is, I'm not going to go massively into detail here, but I was able to sort of understand the phases of development of this place. So this is the base map taken from Digimap from, I think it was the 1980s or something, with some other, some broad descriptions laid on top. I think I use Word to do this. But we start to get a bit of an idea about the place and how it developed from the council building some houses in the 30s through to lots of private developments in the 60s and the 70s. So yeah, so this idea of psychogeographic practice was something which helped me to kind of stitch it all together, because the interviews were in some ways quite disparate. Some people wanted to talk about their family life, some people wanted to talk about education, some people wanted to talk about their jobs. So this is a kind of a description of what psychogeography is. And so it's the study of the precise laws and specific effects on the geographical environment, consciously organized or not, on the emotions and behavior of individuals. So this was coined by a man called Guy Debord, who was a French artist, philosopher, thinker, adjutant. He was part of a group called the Situationists, and they were particularly keen to kind of fight the forces of post-war development. So they wanted to kind of protect places from the bulldozer and people building motorways and out-of-town developments. And they part of what the Situations did was to do group walks around cities like Paris. And it built up into quite a big movement, really, of people in different parts of Europe and in Britain as well. And they kind of did quite playful things, like they would roll a dice to decide which way they're going to go, or they would have one map of a very, very different place in order to try and navigate the place they're in. And it is all about trying to sort of find the true essence of a place. So they didn't quite manage to kind of come up with anything which was particularly scientific, although they were pretty interested in it. They just couldn't quite work out a methodology. And as time went on, by the 1990s, there were writers like Ian Sinclair and Will Self, who kind of took up the psychogeography thing in the UK. And they came very much from a sort of trying to sort of find a place narrative, which is essentially sort of the essence of a place. And you can trace back quite a long line of psychogeographers to people like Charles Dickens, in the way that he conjures up rich atmospheres of London and Kent. So bringing it forward to the present day, what I did was to kind of build on this idea of walking and also the place narrative. And as Colleen is a place with a long history, it's got some pretty old routes and roads through it. So again, using Digimap, I found the maps in the 1880s of the place, and found a route which existed in the 1880s, and then tried as much as possible to follow that route. And the routes are all on public rights of way, and I put together two public events, one of them in July 2019 and the other one in November 2019. And we walked, I think there are about 40 people on the first walk and about 30 on the second one as well. and we walked the route, and we explored the space, and I worked with a performance artist. So in the image on the left hand side, you've got there's some of the people who came on the walk, and Marega, the performance artist I worked with, she's interpreting the time when people started driving cars in the 60s, when cars became really popular, and also when cars people didn't really know how to drive them very well. And then the story came from one of my interviewees, describing the drama of a car crash. And then on the right hand side is the second event in November 2019. So one of the interviewees, he's pictured he's got his high-vis jacket on there, and he actually took us through the place and his memories of the 70s when shopping habits were changing. And so these two group walking tours just built up a really rich picture of the place, and how the place had developed. So kind of putting it all together, I composed the route as a GPX line, and on Digimap there's a function where you can actually import a GPX line as a route, and then you can save it, which is actually quite useful for different interpretations. So this is actually getting into the meat of Society Digimap, of the roam function now. So on the screen here, you can see the combined walk with the two sections to it. And then I was particularly interested in aging. So you've got these overlays within Society, and it's got lots of different data from the census, principally the 2011 census. And for example, here I wanted to understand which places have got the different proportions of people aged 65 and above. And here you can zoom in and out, and actually the data is stored at a kind of a quite a small neighborhood level. So it's a much smaller area than the lower super output areas. And for example, here I could understand where there's one particular part of Killeen that's got nearly 73% of people are aged 65 and above. And the line of the two walks that we did is shown in red here. So that you start to kind of understand how the different places kind of join together. So the thing that I showed a few slides back of the start of the housing estate in the 30s, and then the 50s, that was the stuff that the council built, and then the private developments happening in the 60s and 70s. So starting to get a bit of a picture of how the place developed, so starting to get an idea of the narrative behind it. And so this is one of the things I found really interesting in Society is the Ordinance Survey put together some neighbourhood descriptions, and this is, so on this screen here, you can see how this particular place has got rural residents, cosmopolitans, ethnicity central, constrained city dwellers, and I'll develop this bit in a short while. It's really interesting that they've kind of started to kind of describe specific lower super output areas and neighbourhoods with quite descriptive terms. I'm not sure that all of them are particularly helpful. Some of them are quite funny, but it really helped me to understand how what the place is actually like, and indeed you can transfer this to any any part of the UK that's mapped using the census. So there is, at the moment, we've only got the 2011 census data, which is mapped onto Digimap. I understand that 2021 will be added when it's ready. But I was particularly interested in sort of like the evolution of the place, and you know, my question was, why has this got such a concentration of people 65 and above? So this is the Consumer Data Research Centre, cdrc.ac.uk, and interestingly here it does actually show you both the 2001 and the 2011 census data, which is not quite available on Society Digimap. But this really helped me to kind of understand how the place that I was studying has changed over time. So for example, one of the streets that our walk went through, the specific neighborhood is W06 blah blah blah, which, you know, in the fullness of time it's useful to know this stuff because it enables you to sort of assemble the data. But it's interesting that in 2001 that street was described as being younger blue collar, but by 2011 census it was hard pressed aging workers. So this data sort of helps me to sort of understand the picture about this particular place. And this is now just moving on to the Society download. So when you first look at Society, there's either the roam function or the download, the data download. And for example, on this screen, you can see that I just drew a box, and what you can then do is you can select that place, and all of the 2011 census data layers are there, so you can click and select all sorts of different things. I was quite intrigued by these neighborhood area sort of classifications. So this is the one that I selected, and I'm going to show you in a minute sort of what happened there. But so it's possible to just select the area, choose the kind of file that you want, for example, CSV, and then it just gets emailed to you straight away. So it's really quick and really effective, I think. So yeah, so this just is a tidied up sort of Excel version of what I got, and it shows these kind of super groups, the group name and the subgroup, and it's I think some of the descriptions are a little bit clumsy, like comfortable suburbia is quite amusing, I think. Aging industrial workers is actually, for the purposes of my particular project, was actually spot on. It really helped me to understand things. Detached retirement living, yeah, I understand that. I guess that's people who've retired and they've got, you know, their nice house and everything. You've got semi-detached aging as well. I think it's I think some of the descriptions here are really interesting, and I can see how it would help me to look at a place, you know, given sort of COVID times, that we can't easily travel to other places, but there's so much data through Digimap that we can do quite an interesting investigation of the place that we've never been to. And like I said, it's really easy to download. It comes really quickly. And for the purposes of kind of my wider story, again, this is using the CDRC website. And one of the things that they've got on there is an ability to look at post-war buildings. So this tells me the proportion of places that were built post 1945, and Newport, the middle of Newport is essentially white, which means that there's a low density of post 1945 buildings. But then the area that I was interested in, I've highlighted there in green, shows such a huge concentration of post 1945. So what all of this helped me to understand, when coupled with the interviews and the events that we did, was to see that the reason why people essentially had stayed in this place was because they moved to the new housing that was built in the post-war era, started by the council and then massively developed by private builders. Just that people had moved there and they'd essentially stayed there for most of their lives. And so a deeper study would be to look at the correlation between these kind of red areas of post 1945 development and whether they are indeed concentrations of older people. So nearly at the end of what I wanted to say here, but I think that the actual technique of going out and walking through a place is a great way of understanding it, a great way of kind of exploring the nuance and how lives are actually lived in the place. But at the same time, the data that came through Society Rome and also the historic data, historic maps, really helped me to build up that story of this particular place. And I can see how the method is applicable to other places. So yeah, so this is actually an essay that I had published by the Design Commission for Wales. They're the organisation in Wales that look at design and architectural quality. So hopefully, you know, it will go somewhere, this idea. And this is actually in the presentation, which will get sent out afterwards. But there are some references here to some of the ideas of place attachment and the walking interview, and also a bit of an introduction to psychogeography as well. So yeah, that's the end of what I wanted to present. So if you've got any questions, then please go ahead. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alec. That's fascinating. Really interesting that you picked up on the what do you call them, the neighbourhood descriptions for the different places you were looking at. We have heard that actually those descriptions were designed almost deliberately to be slightly controversial. Okay. And so clearly they're not always going to be accurate, but they do definitely, from our experience anyway, generate a huge amount of interest and debate over how accurate they are and how did you come to that conclusion, and it's right over here but it's not quite right over there. But they're fascinating things to look at, aren't they, especially when you know the place and you walk around it and you see how the real people who live there do or don't fit into whatever the ONS thinks they should be classified as. It's quite interesting. Right. Fascinating. We do have some questions. Viv, if you're okay, I'm going to go through them one by one.
Yep, that's great, thank you.
The first one, I think you touched on this, Alice. Were you able to work out whether people had moved into the estates as they developed and stayed there, or whether they were a step up the housing ladder with continuing moving in and then out again later on?
I think it was mostly that people had moved there in the so the bigger story really was a kind of an industrial reorganisation in South Wales in the late 50s and 60s, and a big steelworks was built near to Newport, and people moved from the valleys areas where there'd been historically sort of unemployment in the 20th century. So yes, I think a lot of people actually moved in that era in the 60s and 70s, and they've actually just stayed there. And I probably have to dig a little bit deeper to really sort of understand if it was the kind of, whether it's a stepping stone to other things. But for example, one of the interviewees said that back then people had to make quite a financial step up to get a mortgage back then. And if you look at the statistics of kind of private to public home ownership in the post-war era, then really people did it was that time when it started, people really started to own their own houses. So I think that is definitely one factor, that because people spent so much of their money at that time to actually get a mortgage, and it was pretty expensive, that might be one of the reasons why they have stayed for such a long time.
Yeah, it's such a huge investment. They stick with it for life, effectively.
So I don't know if maybe it had been a place that maybe in the 80s or the 90s there'd been a load of new housing estates. It might be a different story, but back then it was also coupled with good, well-paying industrial jobs with good pensions at the end as well.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Our next question. Comment. Somebody please map the historic census data. Noted, Gemma. It's on our radar. It's a question of time and finance, I think. A question from Jane. What sort of applications will your research have?
Good question. I mean, I'm keen to develop the methodology. I think that I mean, personally, I enjoy doing walking interviews, and also I think they're pretty revealing in terms of breaking down the sort of barriers between the interviewer and the interviewee. So I'm following it up with some other walking interviews in a different context. But really, I would like to develop the whole thing of using the kind of the walking group, the group tours, as a way of refining the one-to-one interviews. So, for example, I did, I think, about 6 interviews first, and then I did the first public event. And that first public event really helped to sort of narrow down my questions and to concentrate on this kind of story about the 60s, 70s expansion. And then the rest of my interviews really did, they were refined by having people feedback through that first walking event. And then the second event was essentially at the end of the project, and it helped to really give back to the community and other people what the story was, and for them to check it. But it could go through lots of iterations, really. So yeah, it can go in lots of different ways, but I think also, yeah, I'll leave it there.
I think you're right that anything we can do to understand the environments that we live in and why people stay or go, it must necessarily have an impact on how we build new spaces and how we adapt the spaces that we've got. And you know, if you want everybody to stay, understanding why they would stay is obviously a critical thing.
I think it's also a question of the time as well, that what I've understood is that the let's call them the baby boomers, the generation born just after the end of World War II, have got a real attachment to the motor car more than my generation or kind of young people now, and as such this place was built around the motor car, and most of the place is actually on a hill, which isn't great in terms of access to services and things. So that's also a big part of it. Like I said, if it was a place that's predominantly built now, then it would have better design for public transport and better designed, hopefully, for walking and cycling as well.
Yeah, good point. Next question, can we put the reading list back up? Yes, Gemma, we'll send out the slides in due course.
Sure.
Will is asking question, really fascinating to see emotional cartography translated to a digital mapping context. Just a question on methodology. Were the maps produced from participants' walks shared with them afterwards?
Sometimes, yeah, if people are interested. One of the things I did mostly was to write up people's stories as a kind of a short narrative for them to sort of take away. Most people weren't massively interested in the actual route itself, but given time, definitely that could happen. Yeah. Most of the people I went on a walk with, they were pretty familiar with that walk, the actual route, but I mean, to give one example, there was, so some of them were walks of the mind, and there was one lady that I interviewed in her 90s who had she had Alzheimer's, and she was I actually wrote up her story as a 3-page sort of resume, and then we went through it a second time, and then she added further detail to that kind of walk of the mind. So that was an unexpected benefit, really, that it helped her to kind of, she added lots more detail by me writing it all down.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really good. Let's move on. We've got another few coming in. To what extent did participants' relationship to place influence their everyday lives? Did that come out in your research?
Yeah, I mean, enormously. That's what I was interested in. I was interested in the everyday rather than sort of the spectacular. So, you know, there were people there who'd lived in this place for 6 decades, so they were able to talk about being a young person, a middle-aged person, an older person, a parent, a grandparent, and I very much the idea of everyday was really important to this. It wasn't the way that I did the interviews was very much I didn't ask too many questions initially, and if you like, I let the space do the talking. So it's actually part of the method is to let space trigger memories and emotions, and that's one of the things that's kind of, I could send through an extended reading list actually if that might help, but
that'd be useful. Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely one of the main premises of my approach is that you know, somebody who's maybe 40, 50 years older than me, I wasn't alive when they were, you know, a young person, and so the concept of time between us is very different, and space itself is the index, and space allows us to share something in common. And yeah, a lot of conversations were about the walk to work or the bus stop, things like that. And the historic maps are really helpful for me, because I was able to actually look at how things were in the time when people were talking about, so able to see things which aren't on the ground anymore.
Yeah, fascinating. Next question. Pauline is asking, how many did you invite for interview who refused?
Not many refused, actually. I mean, I worked with an intermediary. I worked with an organisation that provides home care to people, so they helped to find interviewees. And actually, the events were really good, because I also worked with the local civic society and the festival organisation, and a lot of the people that I interviewed in the second phase, actually they'd come to that public event in the summer of 2019. So it was, yeah. I mean, I have got quite a lot of experience of doing community development and events and things, so I've got an eye for how to build momentum.
Yeah.
But certainly, if I was doing it in another place, a place I didn't know so well, then perhaps that would be harder. And this is, you know, this is a year of work and a year of investing in those relationships up front.
Yeah, for sure. Jane says your methodology might be valuable in urban planning, perhaps. Yes, I think that's probably a good point.
Yes, please. I mean, that's kind of why. So this is a document by the Design Commission for Wales. It's called Places for Life, and my methodology is actually in this document. So hopefully all the great urban designers and planners in Wales will read it and want to ask me more questions.
That'd be brilliant. That'd be lovely. A question from Susie. Did you measure individuals' place attachment using any psychological assessment tools? And if so, can you elaborate on that, please?
The quick answer to that is no. It's I mean, I was there are different sort of ways of measuring place attachment, but I very much came from a process of wanting to focus on the methodology really, and to kind of, I didn't really set out with a hypothesis. I wanted to understand this particular place narrative. Maybe a next step would be to try and refine and develop a methodology for sort of measuring attachment to place. But it wasn't really my goal for this project, but I would be interested to work on it. And certainly in the reading list of my PhD, I looked at quite a few different approaches to it, but it wasn't quite appropriate for this project, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, lovely. I think we have a last question here. Did you have any relationship with the place before the study?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. Well, this is actually the place where I grew up. So I didn't want to choose this place because the reason why I chose it was because as I was doing my PhD, my dad died, and so I had to sort of spend a lot of time in this place tidying up the house where I grew up, and I got persuaded to actually study it. I hadn't lived there really as an adult, let's say kind of 15, 20 years, and so in some sense, it was a real kind of exploration of my own reflexivity. And the great thing was actually to find out that the story I was investigating was before I lived, really. And also my parents didn't have a particularly deep connection to this place either. So I did foreground what I knew about it growing up in the sort of as a child in the 80s and a teenager in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And that was also quite interesting in terms of, just really tapping into stuff that was beyond my own empirical experience, i.e. it happened before I was alive. Yeah,
fascinating. I'm sorry for your loss, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to say is that it was because I was dealing with my own kind of emotional relationship with this place, I think it did also help people to realize that I wasn't some kind of chancer, or somebody who I had a stake in the project really, and so that helped. So it also means that another place I would approach differently, but I really put a lot of thought into how to do this sensitively. Yeah, that's fascinating. Fantastic. I think we have a last question because we are running a little bit short of time. Last question, Alice. Which article on sense of place would you recommend we all read if we wanted to find out more about the concept? Okay, that's a very good question. Maybe you'd like to think about that and I will
find
have a
one.
think about it.
We'll email it round so everybody can have a chance to get access.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could send around some stuff to do with different ideas about psychogeography, and also the walking interview. I think that there's a project by Jones and Evans called Rescue Geography. There's a website called Rescue Geography, and they did some walking interviews in around sort of Birmingham and Coventry. This was about 10-15 years ago, and they outline all of their methodology. They've got all of their papers in there as well, and I just think their work is fantastic and really thoughtful, and it really helped me to gain a good foundation. And to be fair, actually, they were better resourced than me as a sole PhD student. So they've also got some really good GPS stuff in there. And going back to the question about sort of measuring place attachment, one of the things that they have in their methodology is they match precisely how much time people dwelled in certain places, and they looked at some ideas of maybe how strong an attachment people would have to a place. And like I said, I didn't have the resource to do as much as they did, but I think, yeah, so it's called Rescue Geography by Phil Jones and I can't remember what, yeah, Jones and Evans. I think they're the, I'll send the link.
That would be lovely. Thank you, Aled. Brilliant. Will has recommended something here on Search Place. The article "Place: Encountering Geography as Philosophy" by Tim Cresswell is a nice place to start.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's got some great stuff for sure. Yeah, really, yeah.
Good stuff.
And Tim, I think Tim Ingold as well, as he's an anthropologist, but he's got some really good ideas about how to explore place. His book, The Line, I think it's History of the Line. That's really good, really easy to understand, a little bit conceptual as well. But one of his main ideas is that we have a line, a thread of how a place kind of hangs together. And I'll put some stuff together for sure.
That would be lovely. Thank you. Brilliant. I think that's all the questions for now. Viv, are you there? Are you there, Viv?
I'm here.
You are.
Yes.
Do you think we have time to do a quick demo of various bits of Society Digimap? Is that?
Yeah, we certainly have time. If anyone's interested, I can spend a few minutes doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Aled, for everything. That was really fascinating. We'll send around your slides as well, if that's okay.
Yeah,
and
that's fine.
Your reading list would be really, really helpful. We'll come back in a second.
Okay.
Viv's going to do her demo now.
Okay, can you see Digimap?
Yeah, that's all good.
Okay, so I can't add all that much, I don't think, to what Aled has said. I guess if I just start, when you open Society Rome, you'll find the overlays panel on the left here. And within the overlays panel, you've got the ONS census layers divided into different themes. So the top one's households, we've got housing, population, labour market, origins and ethnicity, education, health, and the area characteristics, which Aled showed us. So I've zoomed in here on Newport. So as you zoom in further, you can see these the different polygons, designating the characteristics of this neighbourhood here. One thing I would say is when I'll show you this at the end, but this button on the top toolbar here would allow me to move into data download, and it will take that area with me, allowing me to then select the data that I wish to download. So essentially you just select let's select one of these population layers, and it will map the census statistics for you there with a legend underneath for each layer. It's not until you zoom into a different smaller census area that those percentages become visible on the polygons. I'm not an expert in census geographies, but I will endeavour to find a guide for you, which is in the UK Data Service website, on the different census geographies and how they work. So that's it's pretty simple, really. It's just a matter of selecting the overlay that you wish to map. As Aled said, we have drawing tools here where you can add markers, text lines and so on, but then there's also another little tab there, import, which is where Aled showed you where he'd imported his GPX track of his walking route. But you can input data in various other formats as well. I don't think we have a web map service option in Society Digimap at present, but you can import your own data in a file. So I'm just going to, is there anything else, Emma, that you think might be useful to show on Society Rome?
Sorry, forgetting to unmute again. Classic mistake. No, I don't think so. The drawing tools are all common to all the Rome applications, of course, but they can be very useful for outlining different areas. And as Aled mentioned in one of his earlier slides, you could add text boxes with text in them to the map itself, if that's useful. Yes. Aled, you said you did it in Word.
Yeah.
Digimap will allow you to do that too. Sometimes it's easier to do it in Word. It depends on the context, of course.
Yeah, I can add images as well, of course. So if you did something similar to Aled, you could add in the images that you take on the route.
I'd say that Digimap isn't. It's got better for annotations, but really it's better just to kind of, you can also print your map layout as a JPEG
Yeah.
And then you can overlay, which Viv is showing now. I mean, one of the things is copyright issues as well. That, you know, if you're publishing anything, then have to show that copyright stuff at the bottom. And if you take the JPEG and then add your own annotation on top, then you get around. You can accommodate that more easily, I think.
Yes, you can get different sizes and different shapes and so on. Yes, that would be easier. We add the copyright statement to the maps just to make it easy for people, so they don't have to go searching out what the copyright is. One of our most frequently asked questions is, what copyright statement do I use? So it's easy to put it on the maps directly. But I think that's everything, Viv. I don't think there's anything I'd add to what you've got there.
No, the only other thing that might be useful is I'm going to press that arrow, which then opens up the area that I was looking at in Newport in data download. So my area that I'm interested in is already highlighted, and then it's simply a matter of choosing the layers of either census data or the neighbourhood classifications, and then adding those to your basket.
I would say though on this particular function that on the data download, you can't see the specific breakdown of the neighbourhoods. So if that will actually represent, that could represent quite a few different neighbourhoods, actually, that download.
Yeah, so
does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So for accommodation, for example, I can choose a format.
Yeah.
And then I can choose the layers that I can choose from are the different census areas. But with the output area classification, there's no layer selection. So is that what you mean, Aled?
No, what I'm saying is it would be quite useful if the different areas could be shown on the base map behind that.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yes. Within the download application, the way it's been designed is that this is just to highlight the area that you're interested in, rather than having anything relating to the data that you want to download, because it's, you know, it's to give people the ability to download multiple data sets in one order.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can understand that's a bit of a
Aled, would it be useful for you then to have the output areas shown on this data download map, so you could select?
Yeah, because that one square that could represent, I don't know, that could be 5 different areas actually, just on that one square. And then
you know that you can import, if you had a shapefile, say, of the output areas, you can import that as a polygon, and that would allow you to select just the data for a specific area like that. It's another option.
Sure.
You're right, it's a bit more complicated that way though. Yeah, we do have these reference grids that people can overlay on the downloader, but unfortunately we've got postcode polygons, but not the output areas, unfortunately. I think that's all I wanted to show.
Okay, thanks, Viv. In that case, I think we're probably just about running up to time. Remains for us to say thank you very much to Aled for his time and efforts with this. It's fascinating, and it's always a real pleasure to hear directly from people who use the services we provide. Otherwise it gets a bit abstract for us. It's fabulous that you find it useful, and we'd love to have you back at some point for your next bit of research. That would be really good.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening. We'll do join us for the next one in this series, whenever that may be. I think this is the last one in the current lineup, but we will be working on some more. If anybody would like to do their own version, please do get in touch. We're always open to ideas and suggestions. Thank you very much then.